The USS Lexington, affectionately known as Lady Lex, slipped out of Pearl Harbor before dawn on February 16, 1942. Her departure went almost unnoticed, lost amid the constant movements of warships preparing for a Pacific still reeling from December's shock. But this voyage was different. Official dispatches labeled it a routine training operation. Yet, according to fragments of declassified Navy memos, the Lexington was bound south toward the Coral Sea, on an assignment so secret that even her senior officers were briefed only in part. At her helm stood Captain Frederick C. Sherman, a calm, analytical commander who had seen the chaos of Pearl firsthand. His carrier, one of the Navy's few remaining fleet carriers after the loss of the USS Lexington's sister ship, the Saratoga, was crucial to America's Pacific response. But as she steamed across the Pacific swells, the crew sensed something unusual. The briefings were vague. Maps were sealed. Orders were delivered in code. The destination, somewhere beyond the Solomon chain. For the men of Task Force 11, Lexington's group of cruisers and destroyers, this lack of clarity was both unsettling and routine. War in 1942 meant constant change. Yet whispers circulated on the mess decks. This wasn't a drill. The carrier scout squadrons were loading extra film canisters, and radio silence had been ordered for all units. Lieutenant Commander William Bill Ault, commanding the ship's air group, wrote in his flight log, "Asterisk, we're charting shadows no one must see. Even the sea feels secret today." Asterisk, the challenge wasn't just operational, it was psychological. The Lexington's pilots, many of them fresh from flight school, had trained for combat, not for silent observation flights deep in enemy-held seas. Navigation over endless water demanded precision, and 1 degree off course could mean disaster. The Grumman F-4F Wildcats and Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers that filled the hangar deck were reliable but limited. Each plane carried just enough fuel for a few hours of flight and a narrow margin for error. "You run out of gas out here," one mechanic noted, "and you don't get a second chance." The men understood the stakes. Japanese expansion was accelerating across the Pacific. The fall of Singapore, the Philippines under siege, and Tokyo's fleets pressing toward Australia. Intelligence on Japan's logistical routes was desperately needed. If the Lexington could locate enemy refueling points, the Allies could anticipate future operations. But the mission's secrecy meant little coordination with Australian command, leaving the ship isolated in both geography and intelligence. As the Lexington steamed south past New Caledonia, the weather worsened. Sheets of tropical rain swept the flight deck. Below decks, the radar operators, new specialists aboard U.S. carriers, struggled to track storm echoes on their green, flickering screens. The newly installed CXAM-1 radar set, a technological marvel for its time, was still experimental. Every blip could be a phantom or a lurking enemy scout. On February 20th, a coded message from Pearl Harbor reached Captain Sherman. "Proceed to area redacted. Conduct aerial survey per Directive 3B. Nothing more. Even the coordinates were enciphered. For the sailors, it confirmed what many suspected. This was a reconnaissance mission under the guise of training. But reconnaissance of what? Secrecy is a weapon, Sherman reportedly told his executive officer. But it cuts both ways. Indeed, the silence bred tension. Pilots questioned why intelligence officers were photographing coral atolls and open sea lanes instead of enemy ships. On the night of February 21st, Ault gathered his pilots in the ready room. He didn't have answers, only orders. "We fly, we observe, we return," he said. No reports outside the chain of command. One flight, designated Scouting 2 Blue, took off at dawn to photograph suspected Japanese movements near Bougainville. They never returned. Search efforts were launched at first light the next day, but no wreckage, oil slick, or radio contact was ever found. The official report cited navigational error and fuel exhaustion. Still, flight logs revealed an oddity. The group's last confirmed position was more than 150 miles beyond their stated patrol radius. How they got there remains unexplained. Bill Ault, deeply affected by the loss, wrote again in his journal, "Asterisk, something's wrong with the maps. Either that, or we're not being told everything." Asterisk, his words would later be recovered from his personal effects, a subtle testament to the growing sense of unease aboard. In hindsight, the mission's early days embodied the confusion of America's first wartime months. Courage under uncertainty, intelligence wrapped in secrecy, and the heavy burden of command decisions made with incomplete truths. Modern historians reviewing declassified materials note inconsistencies in the Lexington's reported course and timing. Some suggest the ship was scouting potential Japanese supply points. Others believe she was testing long-range reconnaissance tactics for the coming offensive. Whatever the purpose, the men aboard Lady Lex sailed into uncharted danger, both literally and historically. Their courage was unquestioned, but their mission remained obscured behind Navy silence. As the Lexington pressed deeper into the Coral Sea, the horizon shimmered under a sun that seemed both blinding and watchful. Alt stared out from the bridge wing and muttered, "We're alone out here, chasing ghosts that have names we can't say." The next chapter of her journey would reveal that some shadows are drawn not by the enemy, but by history itself. By late February 1942, the USS Lexington and her task group moved silently through the vast expanse of the Coral Sea, the ocean stretching endless and empty in every direction. Her crew had settled into the uneasy rhythm of life under secrecy. Drills by day, coded briefings by night, and the constant hum of engines pushing them deeper into the unknown. But beneath the surface calm, tension brewed. Captain Frederick Sherman knew the risk. Without reliable intelligence or confirmed friendly bases, even a single Japanese scout plane could compromise the entire operation. The mission's focus had shifted toward identifying rumored Japanese refueling stations near the Solomon Islands, a network of floating tankers and camouflaged outposts supporting Japan's southern expansion. Naval intelligence had intercepted faint Morse code transmissions believed to originate from merchant ships operating beyond the standard Japanese trade routes. If true, it suggested Japan was extending its logistical arm farther south than the Allies realized. The Lexington's job was to verify, document, and return without being seen. Each morning, the air group launched small scouting teams at first light. Pilots flew in tight formation, their Wildcats and Dauntless weaving through clouds that clung low over the water. It was grueling work. Navigation relied on dead reckoning and primitive radio direction finding. Even a slight deviation could lead to disaster. One aviator, Ensign Harold Dixon, noted in his diary, "Asterisk, it's like looking for shadows on water. You don't know what's real until it's too late." Asterisk, the second day of flights yielded something unusual. Near the San Isabel coast, a Dauntless crew spotted an uncharted cove with what appeared to be moored barges. Two organized for fishing vessels, two concealed for commercial trade. A quick camera pass captured faint outlines of cranes and oil drums hidden beneath palm fronds. But before they could circle back, a violent squall forced the aircraft to break off and return. When the photos were developed aboard ship, the images were blurry but unmistakable. Someone had built a hidden base. Sherman immediately transmitted a coded report to Pearl Harbor, but received no direct reply. Hours later, a message arrived, terse and cryptic. "Maintain observation. Do not engage." Record movements. The carrier's officers exchanged uneasy glances. Why the restraint? If this was an active enemy installation, why not authorize reconnaissance bombings or notify nearby Australian forces? Meanwhile, operational stress began to mount. Mechanical issues plagued the planes, and fuel reserves were stretched thin. Engineers struggled to keep the flight deck functioning under heavy humidity. One afternoon, the ship's radar picked up faint returns, moving targets, but when lookouts scanned the horizon, nothing appeared. Whether atmospheric interference or stealthy enemy patrols, no one could say. "The Coral Sea plays tricks on you," a radar operator muttered. "You start seeing ghosts." Then came the disappearance. On February 26th, a three-plane scouting patrol, designated Scout Section Charlie, vanished without trace while surveying the Northern Solomons. Their flight plan was routine, their last transmission a calm weather report. Yet by sunset, there was no contact. Search flights combed hundreds of square miles. Nothing. No oil slick, no debris. The ocean simply swallowed them whole. Back aboard Lexington, Alt pored over their flight data, stunned by the discrepancy. Based on their reported range, the plane should never have reached the coordinates logged in their final signal, 150 miles too far. Either their instruments failed, or they'd been following orders from someone else. But who? The loss hit the crew hard, shaking morale. One mechanic later recalled, "That night, the ship felt haunted, not by ghosts but by silence." To steady his men, Captain Sherman addressed the officer's wardroom. His words were measured but heavy. Asterisk. Every mile we sail brings us closer to knowing the enemy and ourselves. Our mission isn't a fight today, but to see what others cannot. Asterisk. It was both reassurance and warning. The implication was clear. There were eyes watching, perhaps from the jungle-clad islands that now ringed their position. Historians would later suggest that the missing flights stumbled upon a Japanese supply group, or even an unrecorded intelligence exchange between Japanese and German officers. No evidence survives to confirm it. The official report filed weeks later concluded, asterisk, loss due to navigational error and low visibility. Asterisk, but among the Lexington's crew, few believed it. The story became shipboard legend, whispered across mess tables and in the dark corners of the hangar deck. For the rest of the week, the carrier operated under strict radio silence. No one spoke of the vanished men again, but their absence lingered like a shadow over every mission briefing. Pilots double-checked compasses. Gunners stayed by their stations longer than ordered. Every sound, the whine of engines, the hiss of rain, felt like an omen. As March approached, the Lexington's secret orders expanded to photograph and monitor all unidentified maritime traffic between the Solomons and New Guinea. But deep down, the crew knew the pattern. Each discovery brought more questions and fewer answers. In the distance, the coral sea shimmered with deceptive calm. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the missing flight and the truth behind their disappearance waited in silence. And as the Lexington turned south once more, her crew couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. March 1942. The USS Lexington moved cautiously along the Coral Sea's rim, her decks scorched by sun and salt. 2 weeks had passed since the disappearance of Scout Section Charlie, yet the incident lingered like a ghost on every deck. Officially, the patrol was lost in poor weather. Unofficially, men whispered that the missing flight had seen something that should have stayed hidden. That morning, Lieutenant Commander Bill Alt gathered his pilots in the ready room. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and unease. Maps of the Solomons lay spread across the table, peppered with penciled circles and question marks. "We're flying blind," Alt told them. "Intelligence has us looking at empty ocean, but someone out here is building something big and fast." His tone carried the weight of a man balancing duty with doubt. The next series of reconnaissance runs were conducted at low altitude to capture photographic detail. Each dauntless dive bomber carried Fairchild K, 20 cameras loaded with special high-contrast film. Over the course of several missions, pilots photographed coastlines, atolls, and obscure lagoons. What they brought back was puzzling. The first few rolls showed nothing unusual, until one flight returned with blurred images of structures on a small island northeast of Bougainville. At first glance, they resembled native huts, but a closer look under magnification revealed metallic glints, antennae, perhaps, or radar masts. The discovery electrified the intelligence officers aboard. Radar? The Japanese were not known to operate effective land-based radar systems that early in 1942. If true, this meant they had technological support or a secret supply route bypassing Allied surveillance. Alt immediately reported the finding to Captain Sherman, who sent the developed negatives to the ship's intelligence room. What happened next was strange. Within hours, a sealed courier pouch was prepared. 2 officers in plain uniform, recently attached to the ship under communications liaison, escorted the materials to a restricted compartment. Alt was barred from entering. Even the ship's executive officer, Commander Morton T. Seligman, was told that further review was being handled at the highest level. When Alt asked about the photographs later, he was told they'd been forwarded for assessment. He never saw them again. That night, the mess deck buzzed with speculation. "Maybe it's German tech," one machinist whispered. "They've got radar in Europe, don't they?" Another replied, "Or maybe it's one of ours, a base nobody told us about." The lack of answers only deepened the unease. The ocean around them seemed to close in, vast yet claustrophobic. A few days later, Alt received a handwritten note, and signed, slipped under his cabin door. Asterisk. Not all missions are meant to be found. Stay within orders. Asterisk. He burned it after reading. In his personal diary, one of the few surviving records, Alt wrote, Asterisk. We found something we weren't meant to find. Orders are tightening. Even the radio men won't talk. Asterisk. The secrecy was strangling morale. The Lexington's air group, once confident, now flew with a mix of fear and defiance. Pilots began to double-check camera film and keep duplicate log entries, quietly preserving records of what they saw in case official channels erased the evidence. Meanwhile, the ship's radar crew reported intermittent contacts, brief flashes on the screen, too quick to identify. Sometimes they appeared near known island groups, other times in open sea. When destroyers were sent to investigate, they found nothing. Could be atmospheric interference, the radar chief said, or someone's testing countermeasures. Sherman ordered all radar data logged and transmitted via encrypted burst, but those logs too vanished from later archives. As March turned to April, the Lexington's crew grew restless. Pearl Harbor's responses became slower, shorter, more evasive. The last transmission read, Asterisk. Discontinue surveillance. Proceed to standby operations north of New Caledonia. Await new orders. Asterisk. It was a withdrawal order, but one that felt more like a cover-up. In the aftermath, the ship's intelligence section sealed several crates labeled classified, do not open without authorization. Sailors watched as the containers were secured near the carrier's magazine hold, under lock and marine guard. No one knew what was inside, but word spread that it contained the original film reels and analysis reports from the reconnaissance missions. Then came the incident that silenced all discussion. One evening, during refueling operations, a minor fire broke out in a lower storage area, the same section where the crates were kept. The blaze was contained within minutes, but the smoke damage was severe. Later, a report claimed combustible fluids from maintenance supplies were to blame. Yet several crew members swore they saw two officers removing sealed boxes just before the flames erupted. In hindsight, it seemed too convenient. The evidence, the photographs, even the flight logs, all either destroyed or missing. Decades later, divers exploring the wreck would find warped metal containers in the same area, their markings long corroded away. For the men of the Lexington, the mystery remained unresolved. What had they photographed? A secret Japanese radar site? A hidden supply network? Or something deeper within the intelligence war that few sailors ever glimpsed? As the carrier steamed north to rendezvous with the Yorktown and Task Force 17, Alt stood alone on the flight deck, watching the endless horizon. The sun sank red into the sea, turning the waves to molten gold. Whatever we saw out there, he murmured, someone's already decided it never happened. The Lexington's next orders would take her into the Coral Sea once again. This time, not for reconnaissance, but for battle. By early May 1942, the USS Lexington was no longer the silent observer she had been weeks before. Now she was part of a larger machine, Task Force 11, joined with Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher's Task Force 17 and the carrier USS Yorktown. The stage was set for the first carrier versus carrier battle in history, the Battle of the Coral Sea. But for those aboard Lady Lex, the mission carried an additional, unspoken purpose. Deep within her sealed intelligence compartments were the remnants of the mysterious reconnaissance operation. The photographs, reports, and coded messages that few dared mention aloud. Officially, the fleet's goal was clear: intercept and stop the Japanese invasion force bound for Port Moresby, New Guinea. Strategically, this was vital. If Port Moresby fell, Japan would threaten northern Australia, cutting off Allied logistics and morale. But as the ships formed up northeast of Australia, Captain Frederick Sherman's tone remained cautious. "We're still blind in half this sea," he remarked to his executive officer, "and no one's explaining why." Those words hung heavy, especially after the unexplained lost intelligence crates weeks earlier. On May 4th, aircraft from a Yorktown struck Japanese positions at Tulagi, achieving modest success. The Lexington's air group, led by Commander Bill Alt, was placed on standby, ready for long-range strikes. But Alt noticed something strange in the pre-mission briefings. The coordinates of their search grid overlapped with the very area his earlier reconnaissance flights had surveyed in February, the same region where his men had disappeared. It was as if someone, somewhere, wanted to revisit that stretch of ocean without admitting it. The weather turned oppressive. Humidity smothered the flight deck, and visibility wavered in the dense haze. Radar contacts flickered, vanished, then reappeared. False returns, the radar chief muttered, but nobody was sure. Early Japanese carrier planes had been spotted, and Admiral Fletcher ordered all ships to prepare for contact. The Lexington's crew braced for what they knew was coming battle. At dawn on May 7th, Lexington's SBD Dauntless bombers launched in waves, engines roaring across the flat blue horizon. Their targets, Japanese light carrier Shoho and her escorts, were sighted hours later. Lieutenant Commander Alt personally led the strike, guiding his bombers through anti-aircraft fire and heavy cloud. The attack was devastating. Within minutes, Shoho was ablaze and sinking. The radio call from Alt's aircraft echoed across the fleet. *scratch one flat top. It was a moment of triumph, brief and bright. But even amid victory, secrecy lingered. Several pilots later reported seeing unidentified cargo ships trailing far behind the Japanese task group. Ships not listed on any intelligence map. They carried unusual deck cargo, long crates, and cylindrical objects. When pilots attempted to photograph them, they were ordered via radio to disregard and return to base. The instruction came not from Alt or Sherman, but from an unidentified signal using a higher security code. It was the first and only time such a message appeared during the battle. That night, in the Lexington's wardroom, Alt confronted Sherman about the strange orders. The captain remained silent for a long moment, then said quietly, "Some information doesn't belong to us, Commander. Our duty is to finish the mission." Alt, frustrated, simply nodded. His diary entry that night read, "We won a battle today, but lost something we can't name." May 8th brought vengeance. Japanese carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku struck back with ferocity. Waves of torpedo bombers and dive bombers descended upon the Lexington and Yorktown. The Lexington's gunners filled the sky with flak, hitting several attackers, but luck turned cruel. 2 torpedoes slammed into her port side, followed by armor-piercing bombs that tore through the hangar deck. Fires erupted, fuel lines ignited, and the once proud ship began to list. Below decks, the intelligence compartment, the one holding those classified materials, was sealed off as flames spread. Witnesses reported seeing 2 officers rush below carrying sealed metal containers. They never returned. Within an hour, secondary explosions rocked the ship, forcing Captain Sherman to give the dreaded order, abandon ship. Men leapt into the burning sea, clinging to debris as destroyers circled to rescue survivors. Alt's aircraft, low on fuel, tried to return but never made it. He vanished over the horizon, his plane lost somewhere beyond the smoke and haze. Official records list him as missing in action. As the last boats pulled away, the Lexington lay crippled, her hull glowing with fire. Captain Sherman stayed until the end, ensuring all possible survivors were clear. Then, at 5:07 p.m., destroyer USS Phelps fired torpedoes into the dying carrier to prevent capture. Lady Lex slipped beneath the waves, taking with her over 200 men and whatever secrets she had carried from those mysterious February missions. In later years, surviving crew would speak of a strange calm that settled over the water after the explosions faded. It was like the ocean wanted to bury the truth with her, one sailor recalled. No one ever saw those sealed crates again. The Battle of the Coral Sea would become a strategic victory for the Allies, a turning point before Midway. But for the Lexington, it was the end of a story the Navy never told in full. And as word spread of her loss, a new question emerged. What had been destroyed in her flames that day? Enemy intelligence, or evidence of a mission the world was never meant to know? The smoke still hung over the Coral Sea when the last survivors of the USS Lexington were pulled from the water. Destroyers circled through debris fields, char planks, oil drums, life vests, searching for any sign of life. What they found instead were fragments of a story no one could piece together. The Lady Lex, once the Navy's pride, had vanished beneath the waves, taking with her more than 200 men and several sealed containers that had been under Marine guard until her final hours. Official dispatches sent to Pearl Harbor that evening were brief and sterile. Lexington lost due to enemy action. Crew evacuated. Classified materials destroyed. But the truth was far more complicated. Survivors later testified that not all materials had been accounted for before the order to abandon ship. Some officers, refusing to leave their posts, had reportedly descended into the intelligence section as fires raged. They carried coded pouches and lockboxes, none of which were ever recovered. Their names were recorded among the missing. Captain Frederick Sherman, rescued hours later, remained tight-lipped about the final moments below decks. In his after-action report, he wrote, "Certain sensitive documents were neutralized as per procedure." When questioned by Naval Intelligence weeks later, he simply said, "It's done," and refused further detail. The line between protocol and secrecy had blurred. In the days following the battle, Task Force 11 limped towards safety. The destroyers USS Morris and Hammond ferried survivors to Noumea, New Caledonia, where field hospitals and makeshift shelters overflowed with the wounded. Among them were several communications specialists from the Lexington who claimed they'd been ordered to destroy metallic reels in the ship's lower compartments, records that didn't resemble standard signal tapes. One of them, Petty Officer Raymond Collins, later told a fellow sailor, "Those weren't regular intel files. They looked like something we weren't even supposed to have." The Navy's official inquiry, convened weeks later in Pearl Harbor, made no mention of these testimonies. The focus remained on tactical lessons from the Coral Sea, carrier coordination, radar performance, air defense. But among the crew, a different conversation persisted, the secrecy that followed them even after survival. Letters home were censored heavily, especially any mention of reconnaissance or special operations. Families of the missing, including Commander Bill Alt, received standard condolence notes. His effects, maps, diaries, and personal notes, were shipped in a plain, unmarked crate. Several pages from his logbook were missing. Alt's wife, Virginia, later recalled receiving a single folded page with his handwriting. "Whatever we started, it ends at sea." She never learned what he meant. Decades later, historians reviewing war records found anomalies in the Lexington's logs from February to May 1942. Entire sections have been redacted or replaced. Flight plans didn't match fuel consumption records. Reconnaissance reports reference coordinates that no longer appeared on naval maps. It was as if the ship had conducted operations in places that, officially, did not exist. When underwater explorers discovered the wreck of the Lexington in 2018, lying 3 kilometers below the surface, they found her remarkably preserved. Aircraft still upright on the seabed, markings intact. But among the most intriguing discoveries were 3 heavily corroded safes, half buried in silt near the hangar deck. The safes were sealed shut, their hinges fused by rust. Photographs released by the expedition showed faded stenciling, classified, handle under authority. The U.S. Navy declined to comment on their contents. It reignited decades-old speculation. What had been aboard the Lexington that demanded such secrecy? Some believe the carrier had been part of an early effort to locate or intercept Japanese radar development in the South Pacific. Others suggested a more covert angle, that Allied intelligence was testing its own prototype reconnaissance systems, and the Lexington's training missions were a cover. A third theory, whispered among naval historians, pointed to British involvement, that the Lexington was assisting with a joint US-UK intelligence operation, one that fell under the wartime code name Operation Dracula, long since buried in classified archives. Whatever the truth, the mystery survived in fragments. The families of the missing never received closure. The official narrative remained untouched, and the ship's final transmissions, encrypted burst signals sent minutes before she was hit, were never decrypted publicly. According to the Navy's communication logs, the message header read only, final report enclosed. Mission complete. When Captain Sherman was asked years later whether he believed any intelligence had gone down with the ship, he paused and replied, "Everything important did." The coral sea grew quiet again, as if the ocean itself had taken a vow of silence. The Lexington, resting far below in the dark, became both a tomb and a vault. Her story half told, her secrets half buried. But as one historian wrote decades later, some ships die, and their missions die with them. The Lexington, though, hers was buried alive, and with her destruction, one chapter of the Pacific War closed, while another, far more secret, remained sealed beneath the waves, waiting to be rediscovered. 80 years after the Lexington's final dive into the Coral Sea, her name still evokes a strange mix of pride, mystery, and quiet unease among naval historians. Officially, she was a hero of the Coral Sea, her loss paving the way for victory at Midway. Unofficially, she remains one of World War II's most enigmatic wrecks. Every few years, divers and researchers return to her resting place, cameras in tow, searching for traces of the mission that was never acknowledged in Navy records. When the expedition team led by billionaire explorer Paul Allen located the wreck in 2018, they found her lying serenely at 10,000 feet, her decks intact, aircraft still lined up as if awaiting launch. Among the scattered relics were pilot helmets, ammunition crates, and, most curious of all, the sealed safe spotted near the forward intelligence hold. The safes were too delicate to move, so they were left untouched. Their contents remain a matter of speculation, but high-resolution scans revealed faint lettering. Top secret. Do not open at SEA. The mystery that had begun with coded orders and vanished flights now lay frozen in the deep. Historians combing through declassified archives in the 2020s found small but tantalizing clues. One memorandum from March 1942 referred to Operation CNDLEFISH, a reconnaissance initiative involving joint U.S. British intelligence teams. The objective: to identify and document Japanese experimentation with radar installations in the South Pacific. The Lexington's February sorties, long dismissed as training, suddenly took on new meaning. Had she photographed the earliest signs of Japan's radar capability? If so, the implications were immense. As one British researcher noted, whoever controlled radar in 1942 would control the air by 1943. Yet even now, official confirmation remains elusive. Entire segments of wartime correspondence remain redacted, with phrases like unauthorized reconnaissance and classified under foreign liaison protocol recurring across documents. The most telling piece came from a surviving crewman, radioman second class Henry McAdams, who in a 1986 oral history recalled, "We weren't supposed to know where we were going. When those planes disappeared, we knew they'd seen something. The Navy just decided it was better that nobody else did." That culture of secrecy extended well into the post-war years. In the early 1950s, the Navy quietly sealed several Lexington-related intelligence files for 75 years under Executive Order 10501, far longer than standard combat reports. Those records are not due for automatic declassification until 2027. To date, no government agency has confirmed whether the original aerial photographs or their analyses survived the ship's destruction. For many, the Lexington story has become more than a tale of battle. It's a reflection of how wartime necessity blurs the line between truth and silence. Her loss in the Coral Sea helped delay Japan's advance and set the stage for Midway, but her shadow mission remains untold in classrooms and documentaries. History records victories, one naval archivist once said, but it rarely records what was erased to make them possible. Today, when divers descend to her final resting place, they often find themselves struck by her eerie stillness. The hull rests upright, as if she might yet rise again. The aircraft bear no battle scars, only the quiet dignity of frozen motion. In one dauntless cockpit, a camera mount still clings to the frame, rusted but recognizable. Some divers claim it could be one of the reconnaissance cameras from the February flights, though no proof exists. The ocean guards its secrets well. Modern viewers may find something universal in the Lexington story: courage amid confusion, loyalty under silence, and the heavy burden of secrets carried by those who never returned. Her legacy is both triumph and enigma, A reminder that even in history's most documented war, there are pages deliberately left blank. As sonar scans fade and the expedition lights dim, the Lexington remains, 3 miles beneath the Coral Sea, her decks cloaked in shadow. The Navy calls her a war grave, a place of rest. But to those who know her deeper story, she is also a vault, a sealed chapter of World War II, still waiting to be read. Her final transmission, partially decoded decades later, ended with a single phrase. Asterisk, mission complete. Await further orders. Asterisk, no further orders ever came. 6th chapter finished. Waiting for prompt 3.